2025. Anne, will you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Councillor Huang. Councillor Gonzalez.
Present.
Councillor Rosenthal.
Here.
Councillor Nolan.
Present. Good morning.
Good morning. Councillor Lewis. And Deputy Council President Simpson.
Present. Thank you. Before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees? 2025. Anne, will you please call the roll?
Absolutely. Councillor Huang.
I was like, that sounds like
Councillor Gonzalez.
It's a different safety video.
What?
present. Thank you. Before we begin our agenda items, can we please play the safety video for our in-person attendees?
Deputy Council President Simpson, I'm happy to read the safety announcement for you this morning. Give me one moment.
Sorry for those online, we're having a little technical difficulty here.
I think we're back on track. Please note that we are on the 3rd floor of the building. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room and exit through the main entrance onto Grand Avenue. We will meet outside the entrance of the convention center. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify staff at the reception desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from reception to Grand Avenue, and a fire extinguisher is located in the corridor along the side of the dais just behind the wall.
Thank you so much for that, Anne. Our first agenda item today is Metro State Mandated Regional Housing Coordination Strategy. The Oregon Housing Needs Analysis requires state agencies and local governments to take steps to produce more housing. Under this law, Metro is required to create a regional housing coordination strategy to align local plans and fill regional gaps. We discussed staff's proposed work plan and engagement plan in February, and today we're here to discuss a preliminary list of strategies and analysis of engagement. This effort is a partnership between Housing and Planning Development and Research. So please welcome Emily Lieb and Aaron Key to facilitate our conversation.
Right.
And your title, Emily is our Housing Policy Director and Aaron is our Urban Policy and Development Manager.
Good morning, counselors. Again, for the record, I'm Emily Lieb. I use she, her pronouns. I'm our Housing Policy Director in the Housing Department and joined by Aaron Key. I'm going to kick us off today, and then I'll pass it to Aaron for the second half of our slides, and we have plenty of time for discussion at the end. As you may recall, though it feels like a long time ago, we were here back in February to share an overview of our work plan for this project, and we're back today to share an update on the engagement process that's underway and some of the early themes of what we're hearing through our engagement. Next slide, please. A recap, as Councillor Simpson mentioned, this work is in response to State House Bill 2003, which established the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis Framework, under which Metro is required to create a regional housing coordination strategy within 1 year of our urban growth boundary decision. So that is by December of this year, the council will adopt a strategy. And what is a regional housing coordination strategy? It's essentially a list of actions that Metro will take over the next 6 years to promote the development and maintenance of needed housing. And within the state statute, that's defined as housing that is diverse, high quality, physically accessible, and affordable, housing with access to economic opportunities, services, and amenities. The actions must affirmatively further fair housing. Next slide, please. So this is our draft vision statement for the project. We are looking to create a roadmap of actions Metro can advance over the next 6 years to promote housing production, coordination, and equitable access. And this will be achieved by lifting up best practices, coordinating and aligning local strategies, and addressing critical gaps that can be filled at the regional level. This is really about finding those places in our housing production ecosystem where Metro can uniquely add value and not duplicate work that's underway at the state and city and county levels. Within the ONA framework, the state is responsible for approving city and county production strategies. They are responsible for assigning targets and ensuring accountability for those targets. Cities and counties with populations over 10,000 are then responsible for creating housing production strategies every 6 years. And that includes 18 cities and counties in our region that are creating those strategies on a staggered schedule. So Metro uniquely is the only jurisdiction in the state that is required to create a regional housing coordination strategy. So we are defining what that looks like through this process, but it's really focused on kind of coordination and regional strategies and approaches. Next slide, please. So this is a collaboration between Metro's housing department and our planning, development, and research departments. Both of our departments are already leading significant work that intersects with housing production across the region. And in addition to building on work that is already underway in our departments, we are really focusing on coordinating with local jurisdictions to gather ideas about what they think would be most helpful for Metro to do to support their housing production strategies. Our work plan includes 4 meetings with what we're calling an implementers work group. That's staff who lead housing and land use work at the local level for those 18 jurisdictions that are required to create strategies. And so we've had 2 meetings with that group where we've been gathering ideas. Erin's going to share some highlights of what we've heard later, and getting feedback on how we're evaluating ideas. We also have regular touch points with MTAC and MPAC, Metro Technical Advisory Committee, Metro Policy Advisory Committee. And then in addition to jurisdictions, we are engaging with housing developers and advocates. We will be speaking with Smart Growth Oregon, Housing Oregon, the Home Builders Association throughout this process, as well as connecting with coalitions that advocate for housing justice. So such as Welcome Home Coalition, Here Together, Unite Oregon, Disability Rights Oregon, Coalition for Communities of Color, and AARP. So really looking at coalitions that represent groups who are disproportionately impacted by housing instability. And finally, we also have touch points with our committee, with Metro's Committee on Racial Equity throughout this process to get feedback on how we are applying racial equity lens to our work. Next slide, please. We are really deep in the engagement and ideation process for this work. We're generating a list of all of the potential ideas of actions Metro could take and trying to organize those. And then the next phase will be evaluating those, the strategies. And what we're really looking for in that evaluation is to understand kind of at a rough scale of magnitude, the impact different actions could have on housing production, affordability, access, and affirmatively furthering fair housing. So with the exception of things like maybe a new funding measure for affordable housing, well, even in that case, in most cases, Metro's role is somewhat indirect. We're not directly building housing. We might be funding the development of housing or providing technical assistance, providing research. There are a number of kinds of actions, and Erin's going to talk a little more about those categories. But so our evaluation is really looking at to what extent do we think an action could lead to the production of housing? In terms of fair housing, that is defined in state statute as actions that, when taken together, address significant disparities in housing needs and access to opportunity, and replace segregated living patterns with truly integrated and balanced living patterns to transform racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and to foster and maintain compliance with civil rights and fair housing. So just like to read the statutory language that we have in Oregon, that's a significant lens that we'll be applying throughout the evaluation process. And we'll be getting feedback from partners about how best to apply that lens. And then finally, of course, we will be looking at the feasibility of different actions. So political and legal viability, available or potential resources, expertise, whether that's at Metro or in our region, and then existing partnerships that we could build on and leverage to advance different actions. Next slide, please. So this is just a schedule that kind of shows you where we're at today. That star at the bottom is our second council touch point. We are in the middle of our engagement process. We're also doing some technical analysis to gather some context data that will support this strategy. And we're really working to organize those ideas into different categories and refine an evaluation framework so that we can bring the council kind of a list of ideas that have been kind of organized and evaluated. We will be engaging the council, continuing to engage the council at key milestones, as well as we have a process to apply a racial equity framework to our work to inform how we are approaching our engagement process, how we're approaching evaluation. That's those lightning bolts that you can see at the top. And then ultimately working to bring a draft to council in the fall and a final strategy for approval by the end of the year. Next slide, please. I think I covered this earlier accidentally. So I talked earlier about some of the groups. This is just an overview of all of the different categories of engagement underway. So I won't go through that again. But Erin is going to share some highlights of what we've been hearing through our conversations to date. So I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Emily. Could we go to the next slide, please? Before I get into some of the strategy ideas that we're hearing through our engagement, I want to just lightly touch on some of the analysis underway. This is early results, very tied to the previous work with the urban growth boundary expansion process last year. We start with some of that data and then we're building on it. So that analysis will continue for the next couple months, but I'm going to show you some of the early pieces because it's very important that we understand the need that we're working to meet. We obviously have a shortage of housing, and that's what this slide is getting at, but we need to understand what types of housing and for whom so that we can best adapt this strategy to meet the needs of the region. So this first slide helps you understand the extent of the problem. It might look familiar. These numbers match our urban growth report. It talks both about existing need, which is shown in, I guess we call that dark green, it looks like from here. And the orange is our, oh wait, sorry, I think I said that wrong. Existing need is orange and future need is green. This is for the next 20 years. Yes, Councilor Gonzalez.
Is that cool? Should I wait? I don't know. Deputy President Simpson?
I don't mind.
You don't mind? Thanks. Thanks, Erin. Can you remind us when our forecast in the urban growth report talks about the existing need, I'm like thinking from a equilibrium perspective, the 23,600 for our existing need, what are we maximizing the model for? Is it like every person that wants a home can have a home? Is it trying to model to a certain price point of affordability? Like if we were to magically pop in 23,000 units overnight, what would the model assume that we're achieving?
So this analysis looked at population growth for the next 20 years. So that's the dark green, but, oh, you're talking.
Yeah, I'm
existing
just,
need.
just thinking.
So existing need looks at the population that we have and takes into consideration some basic characteristics of that population, family size, income, et cetera, to make some expectations about what type of housing that individual that we don't know a lot of details about, that we can make some assumptions, would need. And that's how we got into the different types of housing. So, but just based on characteristics and the number of people that we have in the region today is where that existing housing need comes from. It's in part folks that are houseless,
Right.
and using the numbers and understanding about that and making sure that they have units, as well as just based on the numbers of people we have and the number of existing units we have.
Yeah, thanks. But I guess like that was helpful, but there's a part of my question that I'm still wanting to see if we can get an answer to, which is, would that then mean that housing is more affordable, rents would come down? I mean, like what is the day-to-day impact to people outside of the model of that? So I would love to hear, because we're using these numbers to give us benchmarks, but what is going to be different outside of like a metro wonkiness perspective for folks? I'm just really curious to hear what you have to share about that.
Yeah. On my next slide, I'm going to get into affordability, and we
course.
can see some of the impacts of what being short on housing is having on our current population. So that might help, as well as just stating that obviously when supply is low and demand is high, you have higher prices. And that's obviously going to affect the ability of people to afford the housing. And part of the reason we find so many people struggling, and I'm going to get into that. Actually, just go to that slide. Let's just go there. So we've broken this up. So I talked about units first, and then this really gets into who those units are for. So obviously part of what we would see if we were able to meet the existing need is that we would have enough units for more people to be to have a unit of housing to live in and not be living on the streets or couch surfing or sharing or doubling up. But also that we assume that it could affect the price.
Yeah.
But that also has to be, that won't naturally make everything affordable by just producing enough units. We also have to produce units of certain affordability levels.
Yeah, no, I totally get the supply and demand thing. But I guess what I'm not understanding is what is our model factoring for, because we have this number that we're targeting, but it feels like this model is determining then that yes, supply will help and then these things will help. But it feels like a policy decision that is, well, this is what the model thinks affordability is fair to people, right? Like this is the price point that is fair to people. So basically it's like, what if we built 40,000 units? Would things be way more affordable, less affordable? So anyway, I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get to. Like, if we did magically build those 23,000 units right now of the gap, would that actually be enough or not? And I think that is kind of where that's what the model and forecast, it like goes into the machine and the machine churns out this number. But I think there's a lot of assumptions. And I think it's a policy decision for us to be like, well, then what is actually the equilibrium that we're looking for to achieve? And I think this is with this conversation, I think it's a really opportune time to just ask that question and lean into that. So I'll ask more.
Great.
I know that we'll have a bigger conversation about that, but sorry for derailing. I saw the numbers up there and I was like, what does that actually mean
I think
for
it's
everyday
good
people?
that we make this conversational and that I'm glad you brought it up now. So I'll try to get into it a little bit more. I do think there's several pieces of this solution, and it's about number of units, but it's also about affordability and type of unit. So that previous slide got into it a little bit with focused on number of units, but thinking about types of units, and the greatest need was in multifamily. Now, when you look at this chart, the dotted line is total cost burdened population today. So and then we have there is so much data shoved into this little slide. So there's so much nuance that we're not showing, but it begins to give you an idea that when you look at different portions of the population, you see the difference in terms of cost burden and severely cost burden. So severely is the darker line. So anywhere where that line goes to the right of the dotted line means that portion of the population is more adversely impacted and struggling to meet their housing need. So you can see those particular populations, they're younger, folks with a disability are struggling more. Severely cost burden obviously are in those lower incomes below 30% of area median income. You can see the severely cost burden line there is enormous, and it also goes past the dotted line. So this just is a beginning of an indication of how, the ways in which we need to parse the population to understand whose needs we're trying to meet. And this gets at that second piece. So production is obviously really important. We need more units, but we also need units of a certain type to meet the needs of different populations, whether that's folks who are living with a disability or people who are at different affordability levels, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide.
Councilor Lewis.
Oh, yeah,
Rosendahl,
let's
and
stop.
then Wall.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Thinking back to the previous slide, how often do we calculate this? Is this every 6 years, every 3 years, or do we anticipate working these needs more regularly?
Well, we know that we need to do it every 6 years because we do this during the UGB. And then now we have this new state requirement to dig into these numbers as part of the housing coordination strategy, also 6 years. Unless we did a mid-cycle review for the UGB, there wouldn't be, we don't have a scheduled time to do this again.
Okay. I think every 6 years does us a disservice. I think the opportunity to track this almost in real time based on permits and occupancy permits would actually help us measure year over year. What are we doing? We may not be able to track single detached versus middle housing in that way. But honestly, nobody goes out on the market and says, I want a middle housing house. They go out on the market and say, I have X dollars to spend and I want to be in blank school district or close to blank employer. And their solution is middle housing. So even if we could only track multifamily versus single family, I would love to see us do a yearly comparison chart. My other kind of quandary is as we look at multifamily, if we are doing anything to track rental versus condoization, and if we can work on that ownership piece alongside what the state legislature is doing to try and remedy the financial difficulty. I think there are other difficulties beyond just the financial setup of the construction and the lease up. In particular, if you're gonna have home ownership and multifamily, mostly means you're dependent on an HOA type structure. And outside of some very sophisticated attorneys setting up an HOA, those barriers are pretty high and create a lot of frustration and a lot of people burn out. So I would love for us to track what resources the city's government, maybe even our government, can provide to make multifamily home ownership something that a normal person can approach.
Great. Well, I better get through this data and dig into the ideas because we're already going there with some great ideas about what we need to be doing. Councilor Wong.
Thanks. Just on the next slide, on the cost burden, I think I'd just be remiss if I didn't call out under, race and ethnicity, you have Asian as aggregated, and we typically
do that, yeah.
aggregate as much as possible because I don't think that aggregated number.
You're absolutely right.
Sorry.
Put a lot of data into one slide, and that limits the information.
And then also, there's no mention of Pacific Islander, which has very different, needs as well. So yeah, I just caution kind of like this portrayal because we're making policy decisions off this kind of data, but it needs to be, more community specific.
Yes, thank you. When we continue the analysis, we'll get much more specific.
Just real quick on that too. The thing that stands out for me outside of, folks with disabilities and our young folks and our elders, it's this piece of folks at 50% to 80% AMI are also still struggling past the line. And that to me signals a bigger issue around like the economics of being able to house yourself here in this region. That stands out pretty, like the cost burden for folks that are at least 80% AMI are still cost burdened in this region. That's scary.
Yeah.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of the comments by Councilors Lewis and Gonzalez have prompted me. I was going to wait till later. First of all, this cost burden thing is very interesting, and although I would maybe have used slightly different number categories, I haven't digested it all. There's a lot of information there and a lot of implications. What I was going to say is that going back to your first slide on the project scope, if you might, I would suggest project approach, first of all, specifically includes something to the, and I don't have the exact wording, explicit recognition of the distribution of economic categories of housing and the constraints and options for a metro nexus in those areas. In other words, as that points out, the burden is different depending on the income categories, and this affects the kind of housing that is built. And we have limited access to certain kinds of things at the higher level, as it shows. People making $1 million are not really cost burden. They can do whatever they really want. So I think the project approach has to explicitly recognize these different areas of housing and the different kinds of, how they affect different income groups. And again, the tools that we have to influence or to coordinate with our various jurisdictions. And secondly, I think something also missing just incidentally from this project approach is identification of implications of recent legislative changes or legislative programs. I think this is something that we're going to have to be paying particular attention to. Some of these things involving revolving loan funds and so forth will, I know it's already included, but I think specific recognition of this, considering housing is a big issue in the current legislative session, I think that should be included in the project approach explicitly.
Thank you.
Councilor Wong, did you have any other?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay.
Can we go back to the forecast slide, and then we'll let you keep going. I think also,
So I think we wanted to go back to the slide that has the green and orange
yeah,
table.
might have had a computer crash or something. I think there's a robust conversation because we all care about housing, right? So I think this is great. Yeah, I mean, I think too, like I have to say that seeing this chart, I feel really concerned about the policy decisions in the urban growth report, because if it's assuming that 700 and 2100 is our existing need for those wealth building opportunities, those homeownership opportunities, as Councilor Lewis was talking about, that I think we're reinforcing. We're not create. I don't know. I don't think I agree that is true about what people want in our region in terms of opportunities, and that there. I think I'm hoping that we can get to a yes and that we need more of everything. So I just wanted to share that on the record too. Just over the next 20 years, our region only has the need for 700 units of single detached.
No,
That's
58,
50,000.
almost 59,000.
Yeah, it says a future housing need.
Plus the existing housing need of 700.
Yeah, I understand that, but still, the fact that we're only seeing existing, say 700. Anyway, we're pulling at threads here. I appreciate the future aspect of it, but I'm looking at that and I'm saying anyway, just the way we interpret the data. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely additional conversation to have in interpreting, kind of making best guesses about what types of units people want.
Mhm.
And there's certainly a lot of room to cut that couple of different ways.
Yeah.
So let's go 2 slides forward and just touch on one more piece of analysis. We've talked about the amount of housing that's needed. We've talked a little bit about those who are in most need. And this map looks at geography. So it helps us understand some of the existing patterns of where people live in the region, and people who are impacted most by housing instability. We saw that in the previous slide. And then this one takes low English proficiency, people of color, and low income, and maps where those concentrations of people are the highest across the region. And you can see that there are patterns that are in our region, and something that we need to also think about when we're talking about production of additional housing is not only what type of housing it is, what price point, but also where it's located. So let's go to the next slide and start digging into ideas, because I think our conversation, I'm really glad that the data and information got you thinking about what kind of actions Metro needs to take going forward. But before I go there, first, we are also collecting information about the barriers that are keeping our production low currently. And we've collected a bit of that during the urban growth management process. We heard from many folks that were involved in that about barriers. So we started with that. We've been working with consultants to build on that list. And then this is another question that we're asking in our engagement, is for a better understanding of barriers. And we're finding those falling into 3 categories of marketing and financing, regulatory and system, as well as equity and housing choice barriers. So we're going to continue to work on that. When we come back, we might be able to give you a preview of what some of those are. But let's go to the next slide to start giving you a preview of the ideas that we're learning about. So in your packet, I think Councilor Simpson has one in front of him, but in your packet, you've got a very colorful table. That table just helps you understand some of the roles that Metro has in the housing world. And so you'll see those reflected in the table on the screen and under Metro's role all the way over on the left. So I'm going to go through different categories of roles that Metro has. You could think of this as the lane in which Metro operates currently, and where we might have some of our greatest strengths in having an effect on housing production going forward. So I'm going to share with you some of the ideas for suggested actions that you see over in the right column. So one of those ideas related to regulation and regional policies. One of a powerful tool of Metro's in regulation on cities and counties is the Urban Growth Management Functional Plan. And one of the things we've heard from our jurisdictions is that if we took some time to clean up and do some housekeeping in that plan and making sure it's up to date with current state regulations, that we could reduce some of the time that it takes staff to do their findings and respond to how their policies meet ours. So we could just do some simple cleanup in that document and make it more efficient and help the cities move more quickly through their regulations and legislative policies or processes. So there's one idea. We also heard from several of our jurisdictions about wanting Metro to play a very proactive role in legislative advocacy, particularly for funding, infrastructure funding, and funding in key investment areas. For example, the 82nd Avenue area is a focus for Metro's and the city of Portland's attention. And we received a state grant last year to purchase properties, land bank properties, essentially for future affordable housing. So there's a lot of interest in additional work in that area. Next slide. I'm gonna go through some more areas to just get you thinking about some of the ideas coming out. Partnerships and collaboration, as well as convening, are a couple of areas where Metro is often very active in the region. We heard from those who we've been engaging about the need to meet some of the missing staffing needs, shortage in both workers for the trades, as well as building inspectors, and ways in which Metro might be able to help support workforce development in these areas. We had a really interesting idea come from Tigard, who feels frustrated that they're not seeing the level of interest in middle housing from the developers that are working in their community. And they asked if Metro could be something of a recruiter, or do marketing to bring more developers into our region that produce the kind of units that our population needs. There's also a real interest in us convening conversations around affordable housing finance models outside of LIHTC. And interest in Metro helping with the concerns that some neighborhoods or areas might have around having affordable housing in their communities, and that we could do great we are doing and could continue to do and spread our messaging about the great impacts of affordable housing and the ways that it helps communities become stronger. Next slide. So in this one, we've got best practices research and technical assistance. These are a couple of areas in which Metro has been strong for many, many years. So there were a lot of suggestions for research on best practices to understand how Metro might accelerate and pilot innovative building programs like modular development, mass timber construction, non-market social housing models. And in terms of technical assistance, one of the ideas was about a database or different databases that Metro could pull together, for instance, properties that would be eligible for SB 8, which allows an override of certain zoning codes to produce affordable housing, or providing example designs for cities, for applicants to use when they want to build, let's say, a middle housing model. They could have designs that are set up to be approved and maybe expedite that approval process by using these sample designs. Last slide, please. Data analysis. I'm sorry, one more back. I didn't mean the very last slide. But this is the last of this table. Data and an analysis. Oh, this is where that map comes in, as well as an idea to have a regional listing service, one place that people could go to understand where affordable units are available in the region. Right now, that database doesn't exist. A lot of interest from those who we've been working with for funding and investment, securing additional funding for affordable housing, for instance, creating an implementation plan for a regional land bank. We've been hearing a variety of different ideas around land banking and what Metro's role could be in that space, and ensuring that Metro's fully funding affordable housing investments that are geographically distributed across the region, providing more people with access to amenities. And now we'll go to the last slide, and I will stop talking so that we can engage in more, you can engage in more conversation with each other. The questions we want to dig more into are your feedback about that additional data and analysis and engagement. I think we began that conversation a little bit mid-presentation, and then continue about what feedback or reaction you have to some of these initial suggested ideas, so that we can get your thoughts as we continue to collect additional suggestions and begin to evaluate the list of suggestions we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Emily. Before we begin our discussion, I will say one of the pieces, as I look at the rainbow sheet, right? I think about, as we craft this housing coordination strategy, is what is our authority in the different spaces, whether it be funding and investment, regional policies. We need to state clearly what our authority and role is in that new strategy, so that we aren't, things aren't left up for interpretation or muddled or left to the devices of politics or ego. I got first up Councilor Nolan, then Councilor Lewis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The thought you just introduced for our conversation was along the lines of what I was thinking about. I find it a little bit fascinating that some of the feedback from cities was that Metro could play a more active role. I think we will be most effective if the role we play is along the lines of convening, which we are very skilled at and developing really strong support for around the region. And the ideas that were presented about streamlining the permit review and permit issuing process. If you can save a developer 6 months of time in their permitting process, that's a lot of money. Now, whether we can control whether that savings is reflected in the price of the homes they sell, that gets to be a little more heavy-handed, and I'm not sure we want to go there just yet. But how we can provide a convening and technical assistance, if you will, or developing shared interests in common parameters for designs and permit processes. I think we've got lots of room there for Metro to play an important role.
Thank you.
Councilor Lewis, and then Rosenthal.
Sure, thank you so much. I want to echo the power of convening. Metro has traditionally looked at our tools as a toolbox of carrots and sticks, of data and being right and smart and nerdy on this issue that is probably not sufficient. And if housing is the #1 need in this region, I think that we spend a little bit more time developing a new color of the rainbow, and that is using our bully pulpit. And in my mind, every single city has a role to play, whether that is doubling down on what they're doing within their existing footprint with infill, or looking at smart ways at the edge of the UGB to grow. And right now we wait and see. I would challenge us to think through how we can engage every city every year as a council, find out what they're doing, and add a little bit of transparency and urgency. If we're actually asking, what are the 2 or 3 things you're doing this year? That will put it in a different time frame than our normal time frame. And it'll give cities the opportunity to share what they're doing and what they're struggling with and where they could find additional resources helpful. So I would hope that we could come up with a way to use our position with the bully pulpit to add urgency and to add a level of transparency.
Agreed. Here. Councilor Rosenthal, Councilor Wong, and then Councilor Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to sort of echo the comments of Councilor Lewis. I think each city is different. Each city is in a slightly different position, has a slightly different perspective. And so I think we have to get down into the granular and actually talk to them in detail about what they're doing. And we have to be the bully pulpit that sort of tries to bring it all together into some comprehensive way. Your last set of slides showing the nexus that Metro has in the various different aspects, I think was very good. I was a little worried that you were going to leave out TOD, but you included it at the second to the last bullet on the last slide. So I was gratified to see that. I think that's an important program that has a lot of implications, particularly since it coordinates with other entities such as ODOT and TriMet, and has a little broader reach than just a Metro reach. And then I want to go back to that one slide. I sort of have a challenge. The slide showing the dispersed or the disparity areas with the various blue things. I'd look at that and I go, next slide. The one with the map. No, there we go. I look at that and I go, wait a minute. I'm not sure I agree with that. That area shown in Wilsonville down on the far corner is not a low proficiency area, and there's areas in Tualatin that don't seem to be identified that are. I guess I need a little bit more background from someone as to exactly the criteria for which those are done. I think we have to be careful about being, very accurate in this. It doesn't comport with what I know to be in the territory in some regards. So,
Like low English proficiency, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
That-
but it's not low proficiency, it's low English.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and just to clarify, these data that we've shared in this presentation are really intended to provide context data. And some of the ideas we're gathering there are a number of ideas around mapping tools or research that could actually inform actions and policy. But that wasn't, these are really just intended to provide broad context on the state of the challenge. And we are gathering a number of ideas that around data and mapping and analysis that could directly.
Also, it's initial. So this feedback about what doesn't line up for you is really helpful as we continue to complete the analysis.
Yeah, I think it's important to do this analysis. I just think we have to sometimes look at it a little more, can't just accept colors on a map and say that's absolute truth.
Absolutely.
Okay, Councilor Wong and then Gonzalez, excuse me.
Great, thank you, Deputy President. Yeah, I think we're on track. This all looks great. I just have two areas of questions. The first is maybe just a little more information on the role that brownfields play, and just like how often or frequently do we see successful cleanups on brownfields that lead to housing production? I know it's an area of work, but it seems like a resource intense and difficult process to bring that land, into housing production. So yeah, what is the strategy, and I guess how often does it work out?
We have additional engagement going on with private developers. So our HBA engagement is coming up, and I think that will be a great place to learn more about the needs of some private developers and affordable housing developers in this area. We have a brownfields grant program today at Metro that's very helpful in supporting the study of areas to understand their needs for cleanup and understanding the depth of the need on any individual site. But I think there's opportunities for both additional funds to support grants like that to private development, as well as finding funding that could support the cleanup of those sites. Because that can often come with big costs that make particularly development in urban areas, more difficult.
Yeah, it'd be nice if through a process, if you could maybe have a case study or two about where that process actually played out.
Where it was really helpful in opening up sites to develop.
Just like what sites in our region have, were brownfields and have led to housing of some sort. Because I know it's an interest area, and we do have a lot of brownfields. I just don't know what the conversion rate is, and what the resource gap is. So that'd be helpful.
Okay.
And then also in the roles in housing coordination, production, and access chart, I'm wondering where conversations around permitting might come up. I understand City of Portland, for example, there's a lot of folks in the permitting department that might see their positions eliminated due to decreasing revenues, which kind of creates a situation where when we start building and producing again, there aren't enough permitting staff. So we have this long delay time while local jurisdiction staff back up. So I think there's a couple different interventions that we could look at around regional streamlining of permitting processes, or funding to keep permitting staff employed. But I don't see that in the chart, and I'm wondering if partners have talked about what the role of permitting is.
Yeah, we do have that as an idea on the list. I think it was towards the end of the slides. One of the tables talked specifically about the idea of staffing needs. So this could be both workforce development in the trades, but also the kind of staffing. I think I mentioned building permits in particular, but we're hearing this in other aspects of city and county staffing as well. So
Yeah, well, I think it's, it's staffing, like keeping permit staff in place, but also just like the whole process itself, right? It's like,
Mhm.
how do we
streamline?
streamline and lessen the number of, because it's actually very varied across the region. Like some jurisdictions, will get you a permit for construction much faster than other jurisdictions. And why is that? And can we level out the playing field across the region where, some cities are really fast and others are not.
So maybe there's a capacity element, but also sharing best practices. There seem to be a range of different models, and kind of convening and sharing some of those ideas and models.
So both kind of in this fiscal environment, but also like long-term, like understanding why, various jurisdictions permit
Mhm.
that was the rate and speed they did.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Councilor Gonzalez and then Rosenthal.
Thanks, Deputy President Simpson. I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I appreciate the angle around permitting. I think there's a lot of things that we can do beyond the planning and convening as well, because I think sometimes at Metro, we plan and we convene a lot. And I think folks are looking for the action. So I'm thinking about that really high level. When I think about one of the biggest opportunities for the regional coordination process too is I think there's a lot of leadership needed around our unincorporated areas. And in Washington County in particular, for example, the unincorporated areas around the city of Beaverton, if those were incorporated, would be the second largest city in the state of Oregon. So, I mean, there's over 200,000 people that live in unincorporated Washington County in the Beaverton area, in that side of town, and in my district, a huge part of our unincorporated. And I think that those parts of town and the region need to have a really big role to play. And so I think that the counties have a big goal, a lot of work on their hands for that. I'm also interested to hear in terms of for our housing production work, I would love to, and Councilor Lewis talked about this a little bit earlier, but creating dashboards or a system that helps us really track new starts in production at region wide. I think that would be really helpful to be able to understand that data more granularly. And there was another thing too. I think I'm really interested in the policy proposal that Governor Kotek and Mayor Wilson have proposed in terms of waiving SDCs for 3 years in the city of Portland to help to get the engine going again within the city limits, and just kind of going to be tracking that to see how that can help send a policy signal towards a pro-housing production agenda. So kind of those are some high-level reflections. I mean, I feel like I tried to ask my questions during the segment. I am excited that we have this opportunity to convene and to bring partners along to kind of not just have the policy, but this kind of cultural movement around we all have a role to play to build housing and let's do it. I think it's a really special opportunity for us to do that. So high level, those are my takeaways. I hope that we can continue to weave those into our program plan and as we do the work. And I'm going to be really interested in understanding what the policy assumptions are in our forecast for what outcomes in particular is the model favoring for those unit production targets. I'm just going to be a nuisance in terms of trying to understand the 2044 we build those units within a reasonable certainty. What are we expecting for prices? There's prices to maintain, prices to go down. And I think the risk is always undershooting. And if we don't measure properly and You know, like I'm sure 20 years ago, we were planning with so much confidence about what we were going to build and what we were going to do. And it turned out not to be enough, right? So I think I'm just trying to think in that like generational perspective. And I would rather be aggressive and overshoot than to undershoot and then not build enough housing. So yeah, I think if, for example, if we're overbuilding, you know, like it's the folks that win is us because the prices go down, and it's the developers who lose and the banks that lose. So anyway, it's a editorial note.
Thank you. I would quickly like to just highlight that the data team inside of planning, development and research has been working on a database of permitting. So we have some really great data from years past to understand permits and what types of housing being built and where they're being built. And that's going to be really useful data and information to provide into this process.
Yeah, excited for that.
Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal and then Lewis.
Thank you, Deputy Chair Simpson. Just one added thought, the chart that showed the various burdens on the different AMIs, it seems like it might be married with the list of the Nexa of Metro's involvements with this whole process. I'm not sure the plural of Nexus. It's not Nexuses, but at any rate, I think it's Nexa. But at any rate, marry those into a matrix might help us identify where we can have the biggest bang for the least amount of effort. In other words, Kurta-like matrices, you identify where we have significant impact, little impact, minor impact, et cetera, et cetera. I think something like that might be helpful in going forward because we have limited time and limited staff capability in doing this. And I'd be happy to give it a first shot if you're interested.
Thank you.
Councilor Lewis, sorry.
Sure, thank you so much. I am provoked by something Councilor Gonzalez said in terms of the only people who lose if we overshoot are developers who might see their costs go down.
Potentially, yeah. I
potentially.
might have spoken out of context there, but yeah.
It's a little bit oversimplification because I think one of the things that has burdened our region is the belief that when we bring in new area or when we experience growth, new growth pays for itself. And that's why new growth seems to be luxury growth and not growth that's equitable or for all people. So if we are going to overcorrect or correct for that past trend, we will need to see resources spread into growth. And we need to be mindful that we shouldn't be wasteful or untargeted in those investments. So I want to caution us that there will be some pain points where we're going to have to make choices of existing resource flows. And it's not just let the private market. Like love to lean into the fact that government has a role and the market has a role, but the government role is also managing our resources as well. So would like to find the happy medium there.
Yeah. We're having a great dialogue.
No.
May it
Let's
continue,
go.
right?
It's dialogue. It's a work session.
Yeah, this is a
Let's go.
great dialogue. I appreciate that, Counselor. And I think too, you know, as we're talking about like our role as a convener, as policy experts, as having a historic role in this place, we also are funders of planning, right? And so I think using our one of our secret sauce tools, which is the 2040 planning grants and our other tools to really hopefully develop that capacity to do things differently feels like an alignment opportunity for this work. And yeah, I mean, we're gonna have to find that special calibration, but ultimately, hopefully also build the housing that we need. And I think the question is like not what we're building, but who's building it, I think is a huge question. And with our last expansion and Sherwood decision, there was a lot of conversations about what could we be doing differently in terms of racial equity analysis and commitments, expectations. And I think that's where the secret sauce is, the things that we haven't done yet, and in terms of the future and the way that we could do things differently, all kind of builds into not just the new expansion areas, but within the UGB. So yeah, not sure if anyone else wants to chime in, but I love the chat.
Well, I'll just
gearing up.
To
Come on.
paraphrase it, we have to know what we want to do and how we want to do it, but we also, to quote Clint Eastwood, have to know our limits. There's only a certain amount of things we can do, both time as well as legislatively and economically. So this is an important consideration, and you have a lot of work ahead of you.
Yeah. Oh, I have one last thing. I think another opportunity that could be huge is coming up with, like, I'm imagining in a similar, I've talked about this in other spaces, but in the same way that JPACT is able to develop an agenda for Salem and for DC around the kind of things that we want to see from our funders. If we're able to do that at the metro level, maybe it's through the housing pack or whatever, conversations that are looking also at the supportive housing services system. But if we really have a clear agenda and we have multiple partners at the table, I think this region can do a lot if we build that alignment and if we listen to people and if we ask for the right policy changes and the right level of investment. Because I don't feel like our region is showing up as aligned as we could be with some of these major policy conversations that are happening, that Councilor Rosenthal mentioned a few about, some of those concepts that are growing and evolving. I don't really feel like our region is speaking with one voice around that. So when I say one voice, I mean like 3 counties and the cities and Metro coming together in the way that I see us doing for transportation. So I think new muscle to build there as well.
I hear that. And I think that like that's the piece I think is missing, is like our legislative power, or like what is our, like, I don't know, how do we come to the table, and I wouldn't say forcefully, but with some weight, like a JPACT, and say, hey, this is what our region needs in terms of housing. I really support that idea. Any other, we got a minute left on this one because we got to move on. Anything else for the good of the order of this topic? All right. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Emily, for the presentation. We look forward to seeing where you are in July.
Great, thank you very much.
Of course. All right. So now we are moving on to our next topic, which I'm sure somebody in this room is going to be really excited to talk about. TV Highway Transit and Safety Project, locally preferred alternative. Tualatin Valley Highway is home to one of the highest ridership bus routes in our region, serving communities of color and low-income riders. The TV Highway Transit and Safety Project will make transit faster, safer, and more reliable for Washington County residents and visitors, and the equitable development strategy will add housing and economic opportunities for those burdened. Here to share the locally preferred alternative recommended by the Project Steering Committee, we have Kate Hawkins, Senior Transportation Planner.
Thank you, Deputy Council President, and good morning, councilors. I'm Kate Hawkins, Senior Transportation Planner here at Metro, and today I'll be presenting on the TV Highway Transit and Safety Project. I am Metro's project manager for that work and have recently taken over in that role for Jess Sadeb, and before that was Aaron Key. The last time this project came before council was at the project's initiation in early 2022. And a lot has happened since then. So we are happy to be here to share an update on the progress we've made and how we've come to reach regional agreement on a transit investment for the Tualatin Valley Highway corridor. Next slide. Today, I'll be sharing a project overview on where it's located and why it's needed, and then I will be speaking to the components of the locally preferred alternative, or LPA, that was approved by the Project Steering Committee in February. I'll also discuss next steps as we move through the LPA approval process and into the design phase of the project. Next slide. And next slide again. The TV Highway Transit and Safety Project would upgrade transit service on TV Highway between Beaverton and Forest Grove, replacing the line 57 with TriMet's Frequent Express or FX high-capacity bus service. The project is centered on this 16.5-mile stretch of Tualatin Valley Highway, also known as Oregon Route 8. It's an ODOT facility from Beaverton to where it hits Highway 47 in Forest Grove, and west of there, Forest Grove is the roadway owner. And it's a really important arterial running through Washington County. It connects Beaverton, Aloha, Hillsborough, Cornelius, and Forest Grove. And the corridor has long been served by TriMet's Line 57 bus. And for many reasons, it's a prime candidate for high capacity transit service. Next slide. So here are some of those reasons on why we're focused on making improvements on this corridor. First and foremost is safety. Those familiar with TV Highway know about the significant safety challenges on the corridor. It has more serious and fatal crashes than other roadways in the region. And the crash rate is nearly twice the regional average. Many of those crashes involve pedestrians, and many of them occur near transit stops. We also know from this project's community engagement work and from past planning efforts that safety has been and continues to be a top priority for community members. A lot of people also ride the Line 57. It's the highest ridership line in Washington County and has had the highest bounce back rate since the pandemic. But as you can see in this photo, the rider experience has a lot of room to improve. This photo is taken in Aloha, and many of the stops along the corridor are just like this. It's a pull in the ground on the shoulder next to a ditch. Many stops do not have shelters or weather protection or seating or lighting. Travel times are also not competitive with driving. It can take up to twice as long to ride the bus as it would to take the car. And so all of these are things we would hope to address through the transit project investments. Next slide. This project builds upon many years of planning in the corridor, including Washington County's Moving Forward TV Highway project, the East Forest Grove Safety Improvement Plan, investments by ODOT, and Metro also included the corridor in the Get Moving 2020 package. All of this work has led to incremental improvements like median islands, rapid flashing beacons, sidewalk infill, but none of those projects have been an end-to-end corridor-wide effort like what we're trying to do with the transit project. TV Highway is also identified in Metro's high capacity transit strategy as a tier 1 project for the region, along with 82nd Avenue and the Montgomery Park streetcar projects. So it's an exciting time for the region to have all 3 of those priority projects moving forward, and council will be hearing presentations on all 3 projects this spring and summer as they advance towards LPA endorsement and adoption into the RTP. Next slide. Metro and TriMet kicked off the planning phase of this project in 2022. We've had government and community partners at the table to guide the work of this project. This includes all of the agencies in the corridor, the 4 cities, Washington County, ODOT, TriMet, and Metro. It was co-chaired by Councilors Rosenthal and Councilor Gonzalez. And we also had 4 community-based organizations represented on the project steering committee. That committee helped guide the project to recommend a locally preferred alternative and a high-level funding strategy. The committee also guided the project through a series of designs and tough decisions and hard discussions, including one critical point where early project designs came in at $550 million, which partners agreed was an untenable amount. And so the team went back to the drawing board, explored a lot of options, including phasing and breaking the corridor into segments. They all agreed together that a phased approach was not feasible, and they wanted an end-to-end design with investments all the way from Beaverton to Forest Grove. And so what the project that we're bringing forward today is estimated at about $300 million. And we think this meets the needs in the corridor and we're confident that it reached those project goals and is still eligible for federal funding. Our planning phase has also included several rounds of community engagement focused on project awareness, engaging with the TV Highway Equity Coalition, which I'll discuss in a moment, and seeking feedback on draft station locations and promoting an online survey at community events like shown here at El Grito in Hillsborough this past September. And the latest milestone was the steering committee's February vote to recommend a locally preferred alternative. Next slide. Alongside the transit project, Metro has worked together with Unite Oregon to convene the TV Highway Equity Coalition, or TEC, and support the community-led creation of an equitable development strategy. All these organizations shown here are represented in that coalition. And similar to 82nd Avenue and Southwest Corridor, this is a strategy that is applied in parallel with corridor transportation infrastructure investments to stabilize and support community and mitigate displacement risks for current residents and businesses. The TV Highway Equitable Development Strategy was finalized in 2023 and identifies 13 priority actions. And that work is continuing with support through a Metro 2040 Planning and Development Grant to help advance those priority items. And while the Equity Coalition is a separate and continuing effort, it's definitely intertwined with the transit project and has been a great avenue for engagement and informing the project's planning and design throughout. Next slide. Now I'll cover a few of the expected project benefits for bringing frequent express bus service to TV Highway. All stations would have enhanced waiting areas enhanced crossing and traffic signal at all stations. The project would eliminate the partial pull-out bus stop design that we see today, where buses are partially in lane, which creates conflicts and unsafe conditions for bikes and buses and cars. And so will allow for safer bus, bike, and car interactions. And then all stations will also have platforms with curb and waiting areas. The project would also completely rebuild 4 intersections in the corridor, which would improve safety for all modes. Next slide. A big part of this project is also about providing a more dignified travel experience for transit riders on TV Highway. The project includes 82 station platforms or 41 station pairs, and all of them would have shelters, lighting, seating, and real-time bus arrival information, similar to what you see on Southeast Division today with FX2. Riders would also experience a faster and more reliable trip, achieved through improvements like transit signal priority at signals along the route, queue jumps in a few places, improved access for people using mobility devices to get to station areas. The route would also be served by zero emission buses. The plan is to have a fleet of battery electric buses, which would mean less noise and cleaner air throughout the corridor. Next slide. And the project also comes with a service enhancement upgrade. The Line 57 currently has 15-minute service most hours of the day. And as part of this project, TriMet is committed to providing 12-minute service most hours of the day, every day of the week, which would mean about 1 more bus per hour than we currently see today. Next slide. Next, I'll share the components of the locally preferred alternative. This is our region's way of demonstrating regional consensus on the project's high-level parameters, the mode, alignment, and general station locations. Next slide. So this is half of the LPA map. I broke it into two to fit on the slide, but the complete map should be in your packet. And it identifies the recommended mode, which is frequent express or FX bus rapid transit. The alignment is this 16.5-mile stretch of TV highway between Beaverton Transit Center and a terminus in Forest Grove, which is the current route of the Line 57. And the map has the general station locations that were approved by the steering committee. On average, they're about a third of a mile apart. It includes 41 station pairs plus stations at Beaverton Transit Center, Hillsborough Transit Center, and the terminus in Forest Grove. And let's go to the next slide, which shows the western segment between Hillsborough to Forest Grove. I just want to note that in downtown Cornelius, we've determined that we need some more time to have discussions about where exactly the stops will be in central Cornelius. And so those are shown as to be determined, and we'll make that decision in the design phase by working together with city staff and community and the committees that TriMet convenes in that next phase. Next slide. This is the high-level funding strategy that the project steering committee approved in February. It shows how we plan to come up with funding for a $300 million project. TriMet, Metro, and local jurisdictions have agreed to come together for about $100 million shared across all partners. TriMet also has a request into the state legislature for $50 million in state lottery bonds. And we plan to apply for $150 million in federal funding from the Federal Transit Administration's Small Starts Grant Program. Next slide, and next again. Here's a look at our longer term timeline for the project. Planning kicked off in 2022 and concluded with the steering committee's recommendation of the LPA earlier this year. We're now in the process of seeking LPA endorsement, by the four cities, Washington County, TriMet, and the Metro committees. And today is our LPA briefing. We'll be back to Metro Council in June to ask for endorsement of the LPA. TriMet will be the project lead during the design phase from summer of 2025 to summer of 2027. That's when designs advance from 15% to 100%. And during that time, Metro will lead the NEPA process. And with all those pieces falling into place, we expect for construction to begin in 2027 and revenue service opening in 2030. Next slide. And that's the end of our presentation. Our question to you is if there's any additional information that you would like from us before we return in June with a request to endorse the locally preferred alternative. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilors, we're going to open it up for facilitation. Councilor Gonzalez and then Nolan.
Thanks, Councilor Simpson. I don't have a question. Because I know Councilor Rosenthal and I have dedicated so many hours of our lives over the last few years working on this project. So feel like the details and concepts of the project are deeply embedded in my mind. Kate, I want to thank you for stepping into the project manager role and for carrying this project and supporting it. I know that one of the big questions continues to be is like the funding path. And I think for so many of the big projects that we're dreaming about in this region, we're all pursuing that with relentless optimism, but realism. And so it's something that is both in our control and out of our control. I have a full day in Salem next week to be talking with key legislators on the lottery bond as well. So hoping to make a good push on that, ensuring that information with colleagues here as well. And at JPAC, we had a good conversation, I think, about this, similar presentation. And folks are feeling optimistic and positive about the work that we've done. So I appreciate that. And I'll leave it there and hope that we have a good questions and conversation. Thank you.
Hey, who we got next? Counselor Nolan, then Wong, Lewis, and then Rosenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Question to educate myself, maybe others don't know it either. You referenced in your comments that currently transit in this corridor takes twice as long as driving, which is a pretty sweeping data point. I'm interested in understanding how we define that and how we measure it. And then I'll have a follow-up question after I understand it.
Thanks for the question, Counselor Nolan. I may have to point to my TriMet colleague, Dave Alwis, who's on the call virtually. I believe we measure that through passenger delay and vehicle delay. And Dave, if you have more to add and are there on the Zoom call, please feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I can follow up with you separately, Counselor Nolan, with the technical points on how those are measured exactly.
I saw Dave went off mute, so he's just in a different little panel. Hey, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for letting me join. I was joining the panel about the same time the question was being asked. May I request a repeat of that question, please?
Of course, of course. Thanks for being with us. I'm interested in a comment in the presentation about current transit time in the corridor is twice individual passenger car trip time. That's a pretty sweeping data point. There are commute times, there are leisure times, you know. I'm interested in how we measure that, how we define transit time by public transit and by personal vehicle, and how we measure it. And then I want to know, do we have a standard for all of TriMet's system that we aspire transit to be no more than 1.x times what individual car commute time or trip time is?
Yeah, great question. I'll start with the last part of it first. We always aspire for, you know, the bus to go faster. It's more competitive. We get more riders, frankly, if it's a more competitive ride. So, you know, our investment with light rail is, you know, directly aligned with that. For example, you know, if you're taking the light rail in from, you know, Hillsborough into downtown, you can oftentimes beat traffic in the morning, right? And so depending on how we design our transit, we're always competing with auto time, because that's, you know, that's what we're trying to do, give people a better option. And so
but
just
do we have a standard for when TriMet would say, okay, we've really gotten out of whack here, and so this corridor takes priority over another corridor?
I don't think I'd call it a standard. What we do is we look at delay throughout our system, and we identify where the worst delay points are. And so when we're looking at, for example, you know, delay on TV highway, we know exactly where it's happening and what intersections it's happening at. And because, for example, the tool that we're using on TV highway is Bus Rapid Transit, we have transit signal priority and a little bit of physical priority we can do there. We can't do the same things we would do with light rail, right? But we can do quite a bit. For regular bus, you know, the tools are even more limited, but we have our Better Bus program, and that allows us to do deployment in little spot locations. So what we're typically doing is trying to hit those hot spots of where delay is. I wouldn't say that we have a standard per se, other than it sure would be nice to make the bus go faster and make transit more competitive.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think it's like we're just trying to hit those hot spots, and TV highway's got a bunch of hot spots, and this project could really help with speeding things up in general. So in terms of how we measure it, that typically is done with either a PM peak or an AM peak comparison with auto travel time. And so we get different data from different sources from our consultants. and they help us to understand. Sometimes it's tracking Bluetooth devices, sometimes it's doing other things so we can understand what the actual sort of average travel time is for an auto in that corridor. And then we look at what our travel times are for the bus. And we've got great data for how long it takes the bus to come through during that same period of time. And then we just say, okay, if it's the PM peak that we're measuring, because that's the worst, then that's where we can make a comparison. Or if the AM peak is the place where we really want to understand it, we can do that. And I can't say specifically what the numbers that Kate's stated are based on, whether it's PM or AM, but it's one or the other. I'm happy to get into more details on that, but it's fun places to be in the weeds actually on.
I could get into the weeds and it's not a pretty picture right now. I am interested in one last follow-up question, Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yes, please go ahead, Councilor Nolan.
Thanks. And Dave, it's probably you, but maybe Metro staff wants to weigh in here. Do we evaluate cost per passenger mile or cost per passenger trip or some other way of evaluating where we might get the best improvement with travel time, maybe with reduction in greenhouse gases? How does the cost per passenger mile or some similar calculation weigh into it?
Okay, do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, why don't you start, Dave?
Okay. So so cost effectiveness is really the way we look at this.
Okay.
And so as much as we can, we try and understand what our kind of cost is per passenger. Now, I want to note that when we roll out what we would consider premium service like FX, we know that our cost per passenger is going to go up because of the expense of, increasing the cost for those stations and the maintenance for the stations. Adding another vehicle every hour is going to increase our cost.
Yeah.
And so all of that kind of plays in balance, right? And so that actually affects the cost effectiveness. But if the ridership increases and we start to see that come up, and we can't predict exactly where that's going to go, we did see a really big improvement on Division Transit, FX2 line. I want to say we saw a 40% jump in that first year that it was open. The rest of the system also improved because, we're recovering from COVID, and it improved at about, I want to say 15%. So there was a total 25% kind of delta between the two. And so, if we can see that sort of an improvement on TV Highway, and in my opinion, the ridership improvement that we're going to see in TV Highway won't be just because of the travel time improvement. It's going to be a lot to do with the environment as well. If we can provide a safer and more comfortable types of stations that are more visible out there, the environment out there right now, particularly along Union Pacific Railroad right-of-way edge, is just abysmal for the passengers. And this would go so far to making that a much more kind of comfortable experience when you're waiting and accessing transit.
Thanks for that information. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Of course, Councilor Nolan. My order got mixed up when we took down the presentation. So we're going to go with Councilor Rosenthal, Lewis, and then Wong.
I was going to make some overview comments. I'd like to hear from the other councilors first, if possible.
Oh, please. Or Councilor Lewis and then Wong.
Sure, thank you. I am obviously a big fan of what we're doing in the region to bring rapid bus to the forefront of our regional transportation options. Having served with 82nd Avenue, which is not literally, but metaphorically a parallel project. I know the challenges both on the technical side and the community engagement side, and it seems like this project has really come up with a good LPA, so I look forward to supporting it. My only concern or question is around the $50 million from the state. Given where we are, what is the opportunity to move forward on this project if there's only partial funding of the 50?
Great question, Councilor Lewis. So we are in a position where our funding strategy has the state's 50 million contribution programmed for the construction phase. So we would not, we would be able to move into project development, advanced design, and go through the NEPA compliance process without that. And that buys us 20 years of advancing the project and getting it into a shovel-ready position. We see great benefit in doing that work. After those 2 years, there's a number of options we could take. We could go back at a next legislative long session. We can reconvene the steering committee if needed to see what our options are, but we are able to move forward and do really important work in that interim.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I was just down at the Ways and Means capital construction, and that was before the updated revenue forecast. And I'm a champion of money coming to our region. I'm a champion of projects like this. I just don't see how any one project gets more than 25 or 30 this year. So I'm glad that there is like a really solid plan B, and that kind of 2-year window sounds really reasonable. Totally in support of moving forward, still with the big ask, but want us to be eyes wide open and not let a project collapse based on kind of a hope of something that might be unachievable this year.
Thank you.
Councilor Wong.
Yep, thank you, Deputy President. Yeah, I'm also a big supporter. And when we talk about projects like these, I always view them as not just transportation projects, but they have the potential to be like true community development projects. And I know you mentioned the coalition putting together a equitable development strategy, and I think these usually have workforce components, housing components, support for small businesses along the corridor. Can you maybe give a taste of what is in that strategy and where where local jurisdictions might be in supporting that?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Councilor Wong. Yes, the equitable development strategy for TV Highway has 13 priority actions, and like you say, many of them are related to things like workforce and housing. It includes things like supporting the creation of affordable housing throughout the corridor, and a lot of this work is developing partnerships with local governments to find alignment in their priority work, and supporting small businesses and residents. And so it also includes things about building connections with the school districts, and organizing youth, advocating for parent organizing spaces and spaces for childcare. The transit project is one of them, one of the items. Getting involved in local health plans to advance those. So there's a lot here, and I think the work that's cut out for the Equity Coalition moving forward is really finding areas where they want to focus in their prioritization towards implementation. And that's what's happening now through the 2040 Planning and Development Grant. And then finding funding to continue that work moving forward, because it hasn't been identified into the future.
And is that strategy going to go to any of the local jurisdictions as they, consider their LPA votes? Like, are they being presented together, or?
Has the strategy been considered by local jurisdictions? It has been presented to local agencies, but it is not being adopted side by side with the LPA, partially because it was created and finalized 2 years prior. But we continue to meet frequently and find opportunities for alignment and collaboration.
Okay. Thanks.
Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. First of all, I want to say that I, like Councilor Gonzalez, I spent a lot of time and I support the LPA a lot of time on this project, and I think it's worthwhile going forward. I do want to bring, and I also want to say very strong kudos to both TriMet and to ODOT for their continual and the county for continual incremental improvements in the safety, recognizing that some of this can be done with existing projects, whether it's improvements of crossings and so forth. There's a little bit of context here, and that addresses Councilor Nolan's concern. When I first moved to Portland, the Route 57 was primarily a market to market center corridor. In other words, it was used to get from the outlying areas into downtown Portland or close to the heart of the city. It's much less used that way now. Right now, a lot of the people using it use it to come from Forest Grove and Cornelius and Hillsborough to get to various businesses and such along in the Aloha area. So there's a lot more short trips and a lot fewer long trips. So the question of timing is somewhat less important. It's still important, but it's somewhat less important than it used to be. One of the important decisions the steering committee made initially was that it's complete corridor because people use it coming from the west, going to the east, and they stop at all sorts of things. And so it could not be segmented into east and west sections. You couldn't improve just the Aloha section and ignore the Cornelius and Forest Grove sections. So that was important. That the other important decision that is not often highlighted is that it was decided to keep virtually all, not quite all, there are some changes and some minimizations of all the stops because of the new kind of ridership that this route uses. In other words, a lot of short stops, a lot of intermediate stops, and that, a lot of people getting on and off at various locations. And that is something that is important both to the community as well as to the safety of the people traveling on there. That said, there's still some things that are of concern. Obviously, it is difficult, and we have not solved the problem of getting people across the railroad tracks. That's an issue that for the future. And then my biggest concern, of course, is I think the chances that we will get federal funding for this project are zero to slim, and Slim just left town. But I hope that we have a plan for, I trust that we have a plan for moving forward, at least some of the safety improvements in the light of the fact that federal funding is very unlikely at this point in time.
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal.
Any other comments or questions? I see Councilor Gonzalez rearing up over there.
No, I mean, I think one of the other elements that hasn't come up in our conversation is we're also working through a regional flexible fund conversation and trying to assess that, and we appreciate everyone's engagement on that. But Dave, I'm happy that you called into our Metro meeting. It's nice to see you, boss. And appreciate, again, the project team for answering all the questions. And Kate, I think we talked about this at JPAC for sure, and it's been a common theme of our presentations. But the project from 2020, the Get Moving 2020 measure, was an $800 million project. Then we windowed it down to $500 million, and then $400 million, and then $300 million to get here. And so as we are sharing the project with folks, I think it's like we left no stone unturned. Like, we have looked at every element of the project to think about, like, how can we bring the absolute most value, and to get 4 cities, 1 county, 1 state transportation agency, 1 transit agency, a dozen community groups to agree on what that refined approach is a miracle in itself. So I'm really grateful for that. And also I see Mohanad here. I want to just give Mohanad a shout out before he joined Metro to support our TOD work and our planning work. Was a steering committee lead for our equitable development committee work. And so in a lot of ways, this project has nurtured leadership on many levels. And I have so much confidence that that what has been written won't just be something that stays on the shelf, but will be something that's championed from multiple sectors to deliver for community. So I see you here. I want to give you a shout out too, and making the time to come.
Thank you. I'll leave it at that. I think Nothing else needs to be said behind that. Kate, thank you so much for your presentation. We really enjoyed having you here today. All right. Next up, we have Chief Operating Officer Communications. It's on you, COO Madrigal.
Thank you, Deputy President Simpson.
I know it's a lot. It's a lot to say.
I always feel like I'm going to say it wrong, so I was low down. I just have props today to Dana Vissy, our climate analyst on Metro Sustainability Program Team in CAM, who was just confirmed to serve on the City of Portland's new Sustainability and Climate Commission. The 20-person commission will guide city climate action and sustainability goals as a new governance structure and champion for current and future climate work at the city. Commissioners will review and propose actions to City Council, the Mayor, and City Administrator to achieve city-adopted goals to eliminate carbon emissions by 2050 and make Portlanders more resilient, especially communities of color and those most at risk and vulnerable to impacts of climate change. Dana was selected after a competitive process that drew 245 applicants and brings extensive experience to the commission, as well as a strong focus on collaboration, humility, and ensuring climate action serves people and places. So congratulations to Dana. We're super proud to have you representing. That's it.
That's you got? Any questions for the COO? All right. Counselor Communications. I got Counselor Wong, Rosenthal, and then Lewis.
Great, thank you. Just two appreciations. Last Thursday, we had the groundbreaking for Legion Commons at the PCC Southeast Campus. I want to thank Deputy President Simpson for being the MC. It was a fun event for 124 units of housing on campus. And I also wanted to extend appreciations for our COO for coming to CORE last Thursday evening to talk about, the budget and our difficult budget season. I think CORE really appreciated hearing from you directly about, how our values were applied in the budgeting process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Just one item. About 10 years ago, Metro included the Basalt Creek area and the Coffee Creek Railroad area into the urban growth boundary. These are industrial, commercial opportunity areas. There was a planning and agreement between Tualatin and Wilsonville on that regard. Wilsonville is now taking up this effort and doing some more active planning on this industrial area. Things have changed since then, of course. For one thing, office space is not as a prime goal as it used to be. That's one big thing. And plus, there's been a lot of development in the adjoining industrial areas. I will be trying to organize a sort of a listening session to get all the significant parties, and this has been sort of suggested to me by members of WEA, to get together to talk about whether there is some need to reconsider, reimagine, and maybe move forward with some of the industrial, high-tech industrial kind of developments that we have been seeing in the areas in the Tualatin Sherwood area, and as we have recently proposed potentially for the Sherwood expansion area. So there's going to be some interesting discussions going on in this area. It affects transportation and housing. There's also been a new large housing development in that area. And of course, a unit, Planbeck Gardens, which we supported, which is on Boones Ferry Road, which is a great improvement. Anyway, more later.
Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you for the opportunity to report back on the Supportive Housing Services Oversight Committee, which met yesterday morning. The committee was able to hear from Josh and the financial team with an update to the forecast. The Oversight Committee also received a presentation on the housing budget, the entire department at Metro, and also heard report back from the president's work group. There was one other agenda item, but I have no idea what it was. I was focused other places by the end of that meeting. So cheers to the Oversight Committee for a good meeting.
Thank you for even being here.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. With that,
I have one thing. Sorry, I forgot to
I
read.
didn't see your hand, sir.
Sorry, I apologize, sir. 1 second. 1 second.
All right,
There we are.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, just late last week, Jess Adeb sent an email out to everyone with information on the Future Vision Commission, and would like to make sure that I am available to you to talk about that if you so please. And yeah, excited for that. Just want to mention that to y'all. Please reach out. I want to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Councilor Gonzalez. Any other words before we part until Thursday? All right. So I would like to adjourn our council meeting, our work session today, and our next regular meeting is scheduled for Thursday, May 22nd, 2025 at 11 a.m. at the Oregon Zoo in Conservation Hall.
Nice.
So y'all better show up to the Oregon Zoo. All right.
You're looking
Thank you.
good, is what I've heard.